The blood in the snow was the first thing Jacob Morrison saw. Not much, just a few drops, dark against the white expanse of the Kansas prairie. But out here, where winter stretched endless and unforgiving, even a few drops told a story. Something wounded, something running. Jacob pulled his coat tighter and urged his horse forward, following the trail. The wind bit at his face, carrying the metallic scent of an approaching storm. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that would come before nightfall. He should turn back. The cabin was still 2 miles behind him, and he'd only come out to check his traps. But the blood kept appearing, a breadcrumb trail leading north toward the rocky outcropping where the creek cut through frozen earth. And then he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind's howl. A baby crying. Jacob's heart clenched. Out here? In this cold? He spurred his horse faster, rounding the outcropping at a gallop. The woman was huddled against the rocks, cradling a bundle wrapped in hides. Her dark hair hung in tangles across her face, and blood soaked through the deerskin dress at her shoulder. She looked up as Jacob approached, and the terror in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. She scrambled backward, clutching the crying infant tighter, and began speaking rapidly in a language Jacob didn't understand. Her voice was hoarse, desperate, pleading. "Easy," Jacob said, dismounting slowly with his hands raised. "Easy now, I'm not going to hurt you." But she kept talking, kept backing away until the rocks stopped her retreat. The baby's cries grew more insistent, tiny fists waving from within the bundle. Jacob took in the scene with a tracker's eye. The woman was Comanche. He could tell from her dress, the intricate beadwork on her moccasins. The wound on her shoulder looked like a bullet graze, still bleeding but not life-threatening. Her lips were blue with cold, and the baby's cries had that thin, reedy quality that spoke of hunger and exposure. They wouldn't last the night out here, not with the storm coming. He tried again, speaking slowly, keeping his voice calm. "I have a cabin, warm, safe." He pointed toward the south, then mimed a roof over his head with his hands. "Shelter, food." The woman shook her head violently, pressing herself flatter against the rocks. She spoke again, and though Jacob couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. "Stay away. Don't hurt my baby." The first snowflakes began to fall. Jacob made a decision. He slowly unbuttoned his heavy wool coat and held it out to her. "For the baby," he said, miming, wrapping it around the infant. Cold. Baby cold. The woman's eyes flickered to the coat, then back to his face. Suspicion and desperation warred in her expression. The baby cried harder, and she looked down at the small face, her own crumpling with anguish. Jacob laid the coat on the ground between them and backed away to his horse. He pulled out his canteen and a strip of dried venison, setting them beside the coat. Then he mounted up and rode a short distance away, close enough to help if needed, far enough to seem less threatening. The snow fell harder. After what felt like an eternity, the woman crept forward. She grabbed the coat first, wrapping it around herself and the baby, then the canteen. She drank deeply, some of the liquid dribbling down her chin, before carefully dribbling water into the baby's mouth. Jacob watched the sky. They had maybe an hour before the blizzard hit in earnest. After that, visibility would drop to nothing, and the temperature would plummet to deadly levels. He rode closer again, and the woman tensed. "We have to go," he said urgently, pointing at the darkening sky, then toward the south. "Storm, bad storm. You'll die out here. Baby will die." She understood that much at least. Her eyes widened as she looked at the sky. But when Jacob dismounted and approached, she scrambled to her feet, swaying dangerously. "Damn it," Jacob muttered. The woman was in no shape to walk, and his horse couldn't carry 3 in this weather. He'd have to. He pointed to himself. "Jacob." Then to her, questioningly. She stared at him for a long moment. Finally, she touched her chest. "Quichnai." "Quinai," Jacob repeated, probably butchering the pronunciation. He held out his arms in the universal gesture for carrying a child. "Baby." "I carry?" Quinai's face transformed into a mask of protective fury. She backed away, shaking her head frantically, speaking rapidly in Comanche. "I'm not going to hurt her," Jacob said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Look, we don't have time for this. That storm's going to kill all 3 of us if we don't move now." As if to punctuate his point, a gust of wind nearly knocked them both over. The baby's cries turned to frightened wails. Jacob had an idea. Slowly, he pulled out his knife. Quinai went rigid, her eyes tracking the blade, but Jacob just cut a long strip from his saddle blanket, then returned the knife to its sheath. He fashioned the fabric into a rough sling, put it over his shoulder, and mimed placing a baby in it against his chest. Then he pointed to Queen-Eye, then to the horse. "You ride. I carry baby. We all go to cabin." Understanding dawned in Queen-Eye's eyes, followed by a new wave of fear. She looked at her daughter, at the swirling snow, at Jacob's weathered face. She was making the same calculation he had. Certain death out here, or possible death at the hands of a white man. She spoke again, and this time Jacob caught a word that sounded like a name. "Pua," she said, looking down at the baby. "Pua." "Pua," Jacob repeated gently. "Pretty name." Queen-Eye hesitated one more moment, then slowly, carefully, extended the baby toward him. Jacob's hands shook as he took the small bundle. It had been 3 years since he'd held a baby, not since his own son had died in his arms from fever, taking Jacob's wife Mary with him a week later. The weight of this child, warm and alive despite everything, made his throat tight. Pua stopped crying as Jacob settled her into the sling against his chest. She blinked up at him with dark, curious eyes, one tiny fist escaping the hide wrappings to grab at his beard. Despite everything, Jacob smiled. "Hello there, little one." He looked up to find Queen-Eye watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Fear was still there, but something else too, a mother's desperate hope that she'd made the right choice. Jacob helped her onto the horse. She swayed in the saddle, clearly weak from blood loss and exposure, but she stayed upright. He took the reins and started walking, one hand steadying the baby against his chest. The blizzard hit in full force before they'd gone half a mile. The world became a whiteout, wind screaming across the prairie with enough force to steal breath from lungs. Jacob bent his head against it, following the trail more by instinct than sight. He'd walked this path 1,000 times in the 3 years since he'd built the cabin, knew every rise and dip by heart. Behind him, Queen-Eye clung to the horse's mane. He could barely see her through the snow, just a dark shape hunched against the wind. The baby, blessed be, had fallen asleep against his chest, her warmth a small miracle in the freezing air. It took an hour to cover the remaining 1.5 miles. By the time Jacob saw the dark shape of his cabin emerging from the white, his hands were numb and his lungs burned from the cold. He led the horse directly to the small lean-to he used as a stable and helped Queen-Eye down. She nearly collapsed. Jacob caught her with his free arm, the baby still secure against his chest, and half-carried her to the cabin door. The interior was cold. He'd let the fire burn down to coals before leaving that morning, but it was shelter from the wind. Jacob deposited Queen-Eye onto his bed, then quickly moved to rebuild the fire. Within minutes, flames were crackling in the hearth. Jacob lit 2 lanterns, filling the single room with warm light, then turned his attention to his unexpected guests. Queen-Eye had pulled herself into a sitting position, her eyes tracking his every movement. She held out her arms for the baby, and Jacob carefully transferred the sleeping infant back to her mother. The relief on Queen-Eye's face was profound. She cradled Pua close, checking her over with urgent hands, then looked up at Jacob with something that might have been gratitude. "Let me see that shoulder," Jacob said, pointing to her wound. She pulled away, shaking her head. "It's bleeding," Jacob insisted. He went to his trunk and pulled out clean bandages and the bottle of whiskey he saved for medicinal purposes. He held them up, then pointed to her shoulder again. "Help! I help!" Queen-Eye watched him for a long moment, then slowly shifted the baby to her other arm and pulled aside the bloody deerskin. The wound was ugly but clean. A bullet had gouged a channel through the meat of her shoulder without hitting bone. Jacob cleaned it as gently as he could, though Queen-Eye's sharp intake of breath told him it hurt. To her credit, she didn't cry out, just held Pua tighter and stared at the wall. When Jacob finished bandaging the wound, he backed away and busied himself with making food. He had a pot of stew from yesterday that just needed warming, and fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Simple fare, but hot and nourishing. As the stew warmed, Jacob became aware of a new problem. The baby was making fussy sounds, and Queen-Eye had opened her dress to nurse. But even from across the room, Jacob could see the problem. The mother was too dehydrated, too weak. The baby latched and sucked, then pulled away, crying. Queen-Eye's face crumpled. She tried again, shifting the baby to the other side, but Pua just cried harder. Jacob thought fast. He had a cow, a temperamental beast named Bess, who gave just enough milk for Jacob's coffee and the occasional batch of cheese. He'd milked her this morning, and there was still half a pail in the cold box. He retrieved it and warmed some in a pan, then poured it into a cup. But how to get it into the baby? Queen-Eye was watching him, her expression desperate. She said something in Comanche, her tone questioning. Jacob dipped his finger in the warm milk and held it out to Pua. The baby immediately latched on, sucking eagerly. When she released his finger to cry for more, he dipped it again. It was slow, painstaking work, but after 20 minutes, Pua had drunk enough to settle. Her eyes grew heavy and she dozed off in her mother's arms. Jacob handed Queeneye the cup of milk. "You drink, you need it too." She took it hesitantly, sniffed it, then drank it down in 3 long swallows. Jacob ladled stew into 2 bowls and handed her one, along with a chunk of bread. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the howling wind outside. When the meal was finished, Jacob faced a new dilemma. He had 1 bed. He couldn't very well expect a wounded woman and baby to sleep on the floor, but the thought of sharing a bed with a strange woman, especially one who was terrified of him, seemed wrong. He solved it by dragging his bedroll to the far corner of the room, as far from the bed as the small cabin allowed. He pointed to the bed, then to Queeneye and Pua. "You sleep here." Queeneye's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Jacob pointed to himself, then to the bedroll on the floor. "I sleep here." She seemed to understand. Slowly, carefully, she lay down on the bed, Pua cradled in her arms, but her eyes stayed open, watching Jacob as he banked the fire and settled onto his bedroll. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, 3 unlikely souls huddled in fragile safety, separated by language and fear and the ghosts of violence neither had chosen. Jacob stared at the ceiling, listening to Queeneye's ragged breathing and the baby's soft snuffles. He thought about Mary and little Thomas, about the fever that had taken them both and left him alone in this empty cabin. He thought about the Comanche raids he'd heard about, the white settlers' brutal retaliation, the endless cycle of violence that had clearly caught this woman and her child in its teeth. And he thought about the choice ahead of him. When the storm cleared, and it would, eventually, he would have to decide what to do with them. Turn them over to the army? Send them back to their people? Keep them here? He fell asleep with no answers, only the knowledge that for now, in this moment, they were all alive and safe. That would have to be enough. Jacob woke to the smell of something burning. He shot upright to find Queeneye at the stove, frantically waving smoke away from a pan where what had once been bacon now resembled charcoal. Pua sat on the bed, wrapped in blankets, watching the proceedings with wide eyes. "Whoa, whoa!" Jacob jumped up and moved the pan off the heat. The bacon was beyond saving. Queeneye stepped back, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. She said something in Comanche, gesturing at the stove and then at him. Jacob couldn't help it. He laughed. The absurdity of the situation, the woman's fierce determination to, make breakfast? Pay him back? It was too much. Queeneye's expression darkened. She clearly thought he was laughing at her. Jacob held up his hands, trying to school his features into seriousness. No, I'm sorry." He pointed at the ruined bacon, then made an exaggerated sad face. "Breakfast is dead." Something in his tone must have translated because Queeneye's lips twitched. She looked at the blackened mess in the pan and back at Jacob, and suddenly she was laughing too, a rusty sound, as if she hadn't had cause to laugh in a long time. The baby bounced on the bed, making happy gurgling sounds at the sight of her mother smiling. Jacob pulled out fresh bacon and started over, this time with Queeneye watching intently. He pointed to each step, speaking clearly even though she couldn't understand the words. "Fire medium, not too hot. Bacon here, turn when brown." Queeneye nodded, her eyes tracking every movement. When breakfast was ready, bacon that was merely crispy instead of carbonized, plus eggs from his 3 chickens and more bread, they sat at his small table to eat. Jacob had fashioned a nest of blankets on the table's corner for Pua, who was content to lie there and grab at her toes. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault. Jacob could barely see 3 feet beyond the window. They weren't going anywhere today. After breakfast, Jacob tried to communicate the storm's duration. He held up 7 fingers. Days. Maybe 7 days. Queeneye's eyes widened. She looked at the window, at the white wall of snow, and back at Jacob. She held up 7 fingers questioningly, and he nodded. 7 days. We're stuck here together. She absorbed this information, her hand unconsciously moving to her wounded shoulder. Then she looked around the cabin, really looked at it for the first time in daylight. It was a simple space. 1 room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stove, and Jacob's few possessions. But Queeneye's eyes caught on details, the empty cradle in the corner, gathering dust. The woman's shawl hanging on a peg, too small to be for a man. The 2 wooden bowls painted with flowers, clearly made by feminine hands. She pointed to the shawl, then made a questioning gesture. "My wife's," Jacob said quietly. "Mary. She died. 3 years ago." Queenai understood the tone, if not the words. She touched her chest, then pointed to the east, and spoke a name. Her husband's name, Jacob realized. She made a cutting gesture across her throat. "Dead," Jacob said. "I'm sorry." They sat in heavy silence, two people who'd lost everything, stranded together by chance and a blizzard. Then Pua made an explosive sound and filled her wrappings with something that made both adults wrinkle their noses. Jacob and Queenai looked at each other. Despite the language barrier, despite everything, they both started laughing. Some things, apparently, were universal. The days developed a rhythm. Jacob would wake first, rebuild the fire, milk Bess in the lean-to, a frigid, miserable task that left him half-frozen, and start breakfast. Queenai would wake soon after, tend to Pua, and watch Jacob cook with the intensity of a student studying for examinations. They communicated through gestures, drawings in the dust on the table, and an evolving vocabulary of shared words. Jacob would point to objects and say their English names. Queenai would repeat them in her accented voice, then teach him the Comanche words. "Fire," Jacob said, pointing to the hearth. "Fire," Queenai repeated carefully, then "cuckoo." "Cuckoo," Jacob echoed. "Fire is cuckoo." "Water," he said, holding up a cup. "Water pa." By the third day they could communicate basic needs: hungry, thirsty, cold, warm, sleep, baby. And the baby, Pua, was a revelation. At 6 months old she was just learning to crawl, and the cabin floor became her kingdom. Jacob found himself watching her, enchanted, as she discovered his world. She pulled herself to his boot and tried to eat the laces. She found a wooden spoon and banged it against the floor with grave concentration. She spotted Queenai across the room and embarked on an epic journey across 3 feet of floor, celebrating her arrival with squeals of triumph. Jacob carved her a toy from a piece of scrap wood, a simple horse shape, sanded smooth so she wouldn't get splinters. When he presented it to her, Pua grabbed it with both hands and immediately tried to eat it. Queenai laughed, and the sound made something in Jacob's chest unfold like a flower opening to the sun. He caught himself watching her more and more, the way she moved around the cabin, graceful despite her healing injury. The songs she sang to Pua in the Comanche language, soft and sweet, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes whenever she looked at her daughter. On the 4th day, Queenai tried to make bread. She'd watched Jacob do it enough times, and she mixed the flour and water with determined concentration while Pua napped. But she added too much water, and the dough turned into a sticky mess that coated her hands and made her growl in frustration. Jacob came to help, his hands covering hers to show her how to knead in more flour. They stood there, flour dusting both of them, and for a moment neither moved. Jacob became acutely aware of her warmth, the scent of her hair. She'd bathed using the basin and it smelled of the soap Mary used to make, the rapid rise and fall of her breathing. Queenai looked up at him, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that transcended language. Then Pua woke with a cry, and the moment shattered. They stepped apart, both flustered, and didn't quite meet each other's eyes for the rest of the day. On the 5th day, the baby got a fever. Jacob woke to Pua's fretful crying and Queenai's worried murmurs. One touch to the baby's forehead confirmed his fears. She was burning up. Queenai looked at him with desperate eyes, speaking rapidly in Comanche, clearly asking what to do. Jacob's heart raced. He'd lost Thomas to fever. He wouldn't lose this baby too. He pulled out the medical supplies he kept: willow bark for fever, chamomile for sleep, clean cloths for cooling. He mixed a weak willow bark tea and showed Queenai how to get it into Pua a drop at a time. They spent the day and night in shifts, sponging the baby with cool water, offering her milk, monitoring her breathing. Queenai didn't sleep, just sat by the fire with Pua in her arms, rocking and singing and praying in words Jacob didn't know, but understood in his bones. Jacob remembered doing the same with Thomas, remembered the helplessness and terror. He sat beside Queenai, close enough that their shoulders touched, and together they kept vigil. Somewhere around dawn on the 6th day, Pua's fever broke. She opened her eyes, looked around with her usual curiosity, and reached for Jacob's beard. Queenai's sob of relief was wrenching. She pulled Pua close, tears streaming down her face, and said something over and over, a prayer, a thank you Jacob couldn't tell. Without thinking, Jacob wrapped his arms around both of them. Queenai stiffened, then slowly relaxed into his embrace. They sat there as the winter sun rose, 3 people who'd been strangers a week ago, now bound together by something neither could name. On the 7th day the storm broke. Jacob woke to silence, the first real silence in a week. No howling wind, no snow battering the windows, just the deep, profound quiet of fresh snow. He opened the door to a transformed world. The prairie was buried under 3 feet of snow, pristine and blinding white under a cloudless blue sky. Beautiful and deadly, any thought of travel was impossible until the snow melted or packed down. They were here for the long haul. Jacob turned back to find Queen standing in the doorway, Pua in her arms. She looked at the snow, at the endless white expanse, and Jacob saw the war in her expression. Relief that the storm was over, worry about what came next. He wanted to tell her she could stay as long as she needed, that he didn't want her to go, that in one short week she and Pua had filled spaces in his heart he'd thought were dead forever. But he didn't have the words, not in English and certainly not in Comanche. So instead he said, "Hungry?" and pointed to the stove. Queen-Eye's expression softened. "Hungry," she agreed in accented English. Then, "Jacob, good." He understood. Jacob, good, not a threat, maybe even a friend. "Queen-Eye good," he replied. "Pua good." She smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to beautiful. They made breakfast together, working in comfortable synchronization. Queen-Eye set the table while Jacob fried eggs. He poured coffee while she warmed milk for Pua. They moved around each other in the small space like dancers who'd practiced the steps 100 times. After breakfast, Jacob went to check on Bess and the chickens, dig paths through the snow, assess the damage. Everything was intact. The lean-to had held, the animals were fine if annoyed at being snowed in. He was heading back to the cabin when he heard them. Voices, coming from the south. Jacob's hand went to the rifle he carried, his body tensing. He scanned the horizon and saw them, 5 riders on horseback, moving slowly through the deep snow. Comanche. He recognized the style of dress, the way they sat their horses, looking for Queen-Eye. Jacob's mind raced. He could hide her, claim he'd seen nothing, send them away, but these were her people. They would want her back, want to take Pua somewhere safe. They would also likely want to kill him for taking her in the first place. He trudged back to the cabin, his heart heavy. Queen-Eye looked up as he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her go pale. "Queen-Eye," he said carefully, "your people, here." She understood. She clutched Pua tighter and moved to the window, peering out. When she saw the riders, her expression transformed, relief, joy, but also something that looked like sorrow. The riders approached the cabin, calling out in Comanche. Queen-Eye called back, and they urged their horses faster. Jacob stepped outside, rifle held loosely but ready. The riders pulled up short when they saw him, their faces hardening. The leader, a man with scars across his chest and fury in his eyes, spoke sharply. Queen-Eye emerged from the cabin, still holding Pua. The Comanche warrior's expression shifted to relief at the sight of her alive. She spoke rapidly, gesturing to Jacob, to the cabin, to her bandaged shoulder. The scarred warrior's eyes narrowed. He spoke to Queen-Eye, his tone questioning, and she answered at length. Whatever she said made the warriors exchange glances. Then the leader dismounted and walked toward Jacob, his hand on his knife. Jacob's finger moved to the rifle's trigger. This was it. He'd saved Queen-Eye's life, and now her people would end his. But Queen-Eye stepped between them. She spoke fiercely, her voice ringing with authority. She pointed to Jacob, to herself, to Pua. She touched her bandaged shoulder, mimed being fed, gestured to the cabin. The scarred warrior argued back, his voice rising. Clearly he wanted her to leave with them, to come home. Queen-Eye shook her head. She spoke one word, firm and clear, and Jacob recognized it from their shared vocabulary. No. The warrior looked stunned. The other riders murmured among themselves. Queen-Eye turned to Jacob. In her halting English she said, "Jacob, Queen-Eye, Pua." She gestured between them, then placed her hand over her heart. "Stay. Family." Jacob's breath caught. "You want to stay? Here? With me?" She nodded. "Stay. You... Good man. Pua?" She struggled for the word, then switched to Comanche, saying something that made the baby laugh and grab at her mother's hair. The scarred warrior spoke again, his tone urgent. Queen-Eye responded, and their conversation went back and forth for several minutes. Finally, she turned to Jacob one more time. "Queen-Eye, choose," she said carefully. "Choose, Jacob. Choose this." She gestured to the cabin, to the life they'd built in a week of snow and silence. The warrior looked at Jacob with an expression that could have melted steel. Then he spoke directly to him, and though Jacob didn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. If you hurt her, I will find you and make you suffer. Jacob met his eyes steadily. I'll protect them with my life, he said. Both of them. Something in his tone must have conveyed his sincerity because the warrior gave a sharp nod. He pulled something from his saddlebag, a beautifully beaded blanket, and handed it to Queen Eye. She took it with tears in her eyes, embracing him. They spoke quietly for a moment, then the warrior mounted his horse. Before riding away, he looked at Jacob one more time and spoke. Queen Eye translated, her voice thick with emotion. He say, "You are now Numunu, people. You protect his sister. You are family." Jacob's throat tightened. He nodded to the warrior, who returned the gesture. The 5 riders disappeared into the white prairie, leaving tracks that would be covered by the next snowfall. Jacob and Queen Eye stood in the doorway, Pua between them, and watched them go. "You're sure?" Jacob asked quietly. "You could have gone with them, back to your people." Queen Eye looked up at him, and in her dark eyes Jacob saw everything he needed to know. "My people here," she said, touching his chest. "Here," she touched her own. "We are family. You, me, Pua." Jacob pulled them both into his arms, this woman and child who had stumbled into his life in blood and snow and fear, and stayed to fill it with light. "Family," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Pua chose that moment to grab his beard and yank, making both adults laugh through their tears. They went inside together, shutting the door against the cold. The cabin that had been a tomb of memories was now a home again, filled with laughter and hope and the promise of new beginnings. Outside, the snow fell silent. Inside, 3 hearts beat as one. Epilogue, 2 years later. Jacob wiped the sweat from his brow and surveyed his expanded cabin with satisfaction. The new room was nearly finished, a proper bedroom for Pua, who at 2.5 years old was a whirlwind of energy and mischief. "Papa," she called from the doorway, her English and Comanche interchangeable depending on her mood. "Mama says come eat." "Papa." The word still made his heart swell every time. He ruffled her dark hair as he passed, breathing in the scent of Queen Eye's cooking. His wife, they'd been married by a traveling preacher last spring, had become an excellent cook, though they still laughed about that first burned bacon. Queen Eye looked up as he entered, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. 4 months along, and already Pua was excited about becoming a big sister. "Hungry?" she asked in English that had become quite fluent. "Starving," Jacob replied, then switched to Comanche. "What did you make?" She grinned. "Your favorite, and mine, both." The meal was a fusion of cultures, like their life, venison stew with prairie herbs, corn cakes, and wild berry preserves. They ate together, Pua chattering about the prairie dog she'd seen that morning, planning all the things she'd teach her new sibling. After dinner, as the sun set over the prairie, Jacob held Queen Eye close on the porch while Pua chased fireflies in the grass. "Happy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Very happy," Queen Eye replied, her head on his shoulder. "The spirits brought me to you in the snow. They knew." "Knew what?" "That we would heal each other, that we would make something beautiful from our grief." Jacob kissed her temple, watching their daughter laugh in the gathering dusk. "The snow falls silent," he murmured, "but we are loud with life." Queen Eye smiled. "Yes, loud with life, loud with love." And in that moment, under the vast Kansas sky, 2 people from different worlds, brought together by tragedy and bound by choice, knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Home, the end. Chapter 1. The Brush of Destiny. The berries were ripe, dark, swollen, glistening with morning dew, and Ella May Turner plucked them with the kind of dreamy care one might use when gathering jewels for a crown. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines like thin shafts of honey, warm against her sleeves as she worked. The wicker basket on her arm was hardly half full, but she already pictured the 2 blackberry pies cooling on their window ledge. Pies for the 25th anniversary of Grayson Hollow becoming a town. Pies everyone expected of her. Ella Turner always brought pies, but this year she hoped someone special might taste one. Flint Derringer. Just thinking his name made her smile, though she tried hard not to. She told herself she was being foolish. Flint didn't belong to anyone but the mountains and streams he disappeared into for weeks on end. Still. Maybe tonight he'd show up to the bonfire and the fiddling and the silver lanterns strung across the square. Maybe he'd see her in her cornflower blue dress. Maybe he'd ask her father for permission to court her. Maybe tonight everything will change. She pulled another clump of berries, humming to herself, letting the tune tumble gently through the quiet woods. It was peaceful here, sweeter than any song. Even the birds held their breaths between notes, as if admiring her hopes. Ella lifted her basket, checking the weight, almost enough for 2 pies. She'd promised her father she would return before noon. He hated when she wandered too far alone, but the berries were thickest near the deeper woods, and she'd been so lost in thoughts she hadn't noticed she'd drifted farther than she intended. A soft breeze brushed her cheek. Then, snuffle. Snort. Ella froze. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. She turned slowly, trying to see beyond the fern-covered slope behind her. A rustling, a low huff, another. Bears. She knew that sound. Every child in Grayson Hollow did. Black bears wandered these woods often enough, mostly shy and uninterested in people. But a mother with cubs? Ella's throat tightened. She couldn't see them, only hear them. Dangerously close. She backed up a step. A twig snapped under her boot. The forest went abruptly still. Then came the deep, warning growl. Ella dropped her basket, and she ran. Chapter 2. Flight into Darkness. Branches whipped against her arms as she fled, heart hammering so loud she swore it echoed through the trees. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't. Every instinct screamed run. The ground sloped downward and she followed its pull, leaping over roots, dodging branches. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She imagined claws thundering behind her, teeth snapping, hot breath at her heels. A rock rolled under her boot. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. Her braids slapped against her back, unraveling in the wind of her speed. She didn't know where she was anymore. The familiar paths had vanished behind a blur of panic. "Please," she whispered to no one, to the trees, to the God who watched over fools and frightened girls. A shadow passed to her left, just the sway of a branch, but she shrieked and ran harder, lungs burning. Then her foot snagged on a twisted root, half buried under leaves. She pitched forward with a cry. The world flipped. Sky, earth, sky again. Her body tumbling down a steep embankment she hadn't even seen. She crashed through brush, rolled over stones, then... Splash! Cold water swallowed her lower half as she slammed to a stop at the base of the hill, half in a creek, half on its muddy bank. A bright flash burst behind her eyelids, and Ella knew nothing more. Chapter 3. Firelight and a Stranger. The first thing she heard was the crackling, soft, steady, almost comforting. Then the scent of smoke, pine smoke, and something warm beneath her head. Her eyes fluttered open. Above her, stars glittered through the break in the trees, silver-white and distant, as if part of a world she no longer quite belonged to. Ella blinked, confusion swirling. A band of pain tightened around her skull. She reached up and flinched. Cloth. A wrap. Her head was bandaged. Where was she? The fire's glow licked the surrounding pines, casting long shadows. The creek still murmured nearby, a gentle ribbon of sound. She was lying on a bed of soft pine boughs, layered thick as a mattress. She tried to sit up. Agony bolted through her ankle and skull. She gasped and collapsed back, dizzy. Father. Mother. Oh, heavens, the pies. The celebration. They would be frantic by now, searching for her. The dance would have begun, lanterns lit, fiddles singing. She was supposed to be there. Flint might have come tonight. She'd wanted to see him in the lantern light, maybe ask if he'd missed her while he'd been away hunting. Foolish dreams, maybe, but still. A sound across the fire snapped her back to the present. Not a bear, not an animal at all. A shape, a figure, sitting in the shadows beyond the fire, watching her. Ella's breath hitched. The form rose slowly, like smoke unfolding into a man's outline. He stepped into the thin edge of firelight. A man, tall, lean, wearing a long-sleeved shirt and buckskin pants. A feather hung loosely from his hair. His face was mostly hidden by a dark cloth tied around the lower half. A Cherokee. She swallowed. Her pulse quickened. He spoke first, voice low and calm. "Do not move. Your ankle is broken." His English was smooth, accented but clear. Ella stared, trembling. You saved me?" He nodded once. "You fell. I found you by the water." Her mind whirled. He was no stranger to these woods, that much she knew. Their region had long been bordered by Cherokee land, though most of the tribe had been pushed westward or deeper into the mountains. But some still remained, some who tried not to cross paths with white settlers unless necessary. Yet here one sat, only feet away, studying her with dark, quiet eyes above that cloth mask. What's your name?" she whispered. He hesitated. "Chilo." The name suited him, soft but strong, like river stones worn smooth by time. "I'm Ella," she managed, voice barely steady. "I know." He lifted a hand, gentle as drifting ash. "You spoke it in your sleep." Heat rushed to her cheeks. Had she spoken more? Had she murmured about Flint? About pies? About the bears? Her ankle throbbed hard enough to drown the embarrassment. How long have I been here?" "One night," he said. "You woke earlier but did not stay awake. You needed rest." A night. A full night gone. Her family must be sick with worry. Flint, too, if he'd come home in time for the festival. Chilo knelt at her side and offered her a small cup made of carved wood. "Drink, willow bark tea, for the pain." She hesitated, but he waited patiently. No urgency, no threat in his posture. Just a tired kind of concern. Ella drank. It was bitter, but warmth spread through her aching bones. She fell asleep before she could finish asking him anything more. Chapter 4. The Masked Healer. 2 days passed in a rhythm of pain, healing, and quiet conversation. Chilo moved like a shadow, silent, careful, almost reverent in how he tended her. He brought berries and roasted rabbit, fresh water from the creek, herbs for her swelling. When she tried to sit up, he gently pressed her shoulder back into the pine bed. "You are not ready," he said more than once. Ella learned pieces of him between swallows of tea and moments of dazed rest. He was Cherokee, yes, but not of a tribe that roamed much now. His people had been scattered, many taken westward years ago. He spoke of relatives lost to disease and displacement, of his childhood in the Smoky Mountains, learning to track elk with his uncle. But he said almost nothing of the mask covering his lower face. Not until the second night, when fireflies drifted between the trees and the moon sank behind a ridge. Ella, drifting between wake and sleep, whispered, Why do you hide your face?" Silence stretched. The fire crackled. Then Chilo said, voice rawer than she'd ever heard it, "White men burned me." Her heart tightened. "They locked me in a jail," he continued. "Accused me of killings I did not do. A child had died near their settlement. They blamed the nearest Cherokee. They blamed me." Ella felt tears sting her eyes. "But you're kind, gentle. Anyone can see—" "Not anyone." His voice was bitter, but not toward her. "They said I was dangerous, that our people were all murderers, so they burned the place while I slept inside." Her hand trembled against the blanket. "How did you escape?" "An old man helped me. He cut the back wall open before the flames reached it fully." Chilo touched his mask lightly, fingers brushing the cloth. "But not before they marked me. I cannot show my face in white settlements. I frighten even some of my own people." Ella whispered, "You don't frighten me." His eyes lifted to hers, dark, deep, surprised. She held his gaze, meaning every word. His voice softened. "Sleep now, Ella." But she could not sleep. Her thoughts tangled with pain and the strange comfort of this man who had rescued her without obligation. The woods felt different in his presence, less threatening, more alive. She found herself studying the slope of his shoulders, the calm intelligence in his eyes, the way he listened fully whenever she spoke, and she found herself wondering, dangerously, how such a gentle soul could have been cast as a villain. Chapter 5. The Third Morning. By the third day, Ella managed to sit upright without fainting, though her ankle throbbed each time she shifted. Chilo brought her the last of the rabbit, wrapped in leaves, and sat a respectful distance away while she ate. "You will heal," he said quietly. "Not quickly, but well." "My father will think I'm dead," Ella murmured. "I will take you back when you can ride," he assured her. She looked at him then, really looked. At the line of his jaw above the mask, at the strength in his hands, at the kindness he tried to hide beneath quiet discipline. "Chilo," she hesitated. "Thank you." He inclined his head but didn't smile. He rarely smiled. Yet she wished he would. She had just reached for her cup of water when the forest exploded. A shout, raw, furious, split the air. Boots pounded onto the clearing. A tall figure barreled through the brush, rifle raised, eyes blazing. "Get away from her!" Ella gasped. Flint. Chapter 6. Fury in the Pines. Flint Derringer looked wild, hair uncombed, chest heaving, clothes filthy from days of searching. He saw her sitting upright, saw Chilo only a few steps away, and rage contorted his features. "You filthy savage," Flint roared. "You've kept her here, tied her up, done God knows what." "I have not touched her in dishonor," Chilo said evenly, rising to his feet. "She was hurt. I cared for her." "Liar!" Flint charged. "Stop!" Ella cried, arms outstretched, but the men collided before she could draw another breath. Their bodies crashed to the forest floor in a tangle of fists and fury. Flint swung wildly, fueled by terror and jealousy, but Chilo moved with controlled power, blocking, pivoting, matching him, strike for strike. Ella screamed as Flint's fist cracked against Chilo's jaw. Chilo staggered, then the cloth mask slipped. It fell to the ground. Ella's breath froze. Half of Chilo's face, his right side, was a landscape of deep, ridged scars, twisted, shiny, as if the fire had melted the flesh. The corner of his mouth pulled slightly downward where the skin had refused to heal evenly. The burns extended up to his cheekbone and partly to his neck. Ella's heart broke, not from horror, from compassion so fierce it hurt. Flint recoiled. "God Almighty, what are you?" Chilo flinched, not at the insult, but at the exposure. He grabbed the mask and pulled it quickly back over his face. Flint lunged again in disgust, and Chilo dodged, swept his legs out from under him, and pinned him hard. A rope appeared from Chilo's belt. Ella hadn't even seen it before this moment. In swift, practiced motions, he tied Flint's hands behind his back, then dragged him to a tree and secured him there. Flint cursed, thrashed, glared daggers at both of them. "You've bewitched her," he snarled. "Ella, don't trust him. He's dangerous. He's a savage and a liar and—" "Stop!" Ella snapped. Flint fell silent, shocked. Ella drew a shaky breath, ignoring the ache in her ribs. "Flint, he saved my life. Twice. I wouldn't be alive without him." "He kidnapped you." "No." Her voice trembled with intensity. "The bears chased me. I fell. Chilo rescued me." Flint's face hardened. "He wants you. Can't you see? That's why he kept you here." Ella felt the truth twist inside her. She looked at Chilo, at the quiet pain in his eyes, the shame of being seen, the way he now kept his face turned away from her. "I stayed," she said softly, "because I had no choice, but also because he was kind." Flint scoffed. "Kind? That thing?" "Flint!" she cried, heart cracking at the cruelty. Chilo stood rigid, fists clenched. "Let him speak," he murmured. "He is only saying what many believe." "But it isn't true," Ella insisted. She reached for Chilo's arm, and he flinched as though burned anew. Her breath caught. "Chilo." "Ella," he said quietly, "you should return with your people." Flint strained against his bindings. "Yes, come with me. I'll take you home. I'll marry you, Ella. I'll keep you safe." She froze. Flint's voice softened, desperate now. "I've always cared for you. You know that. Come home." Ella looked between the two men. Flint, strong, familiar, the boy she'd once dreamed of, the one she'd waited months to see. And Chilo, the masked healer, the man who listened, who moved with grace through the world, whose eyes held a depth Flint could never understand. Her pulse pounded. Her heart knew. Chapter 7. The Choice. Silence clung to the clearing like a damp veil. The fire popped softly. The creek whispered. A hawk cried somewhere in the distance. Ella lifted her chin. "Flint," she said gently, "I cared for you. I truly did. But you don't see me. Not really. And you don't see Chilo at all." He snarled. "He's a monster, Ella." "No." She crawled forward, ignoring the pain shooting up her injured leg, until she was close to Chilo. Her hand brushed his. He stiffened, but didn't pull away. "Chilo is the bravest, gentlest man I've ever known." Flint shook his head violently. "You're out of your mind." Maybe she was. Maybe the blow to her head had loosened something, but her heart had never felt clearer. She looked up at Chilo, eyes shining. "Take me with you, please." Chilo's breath caught. "Ella, you would leave your home, your family?" "I'll send word I'm safe," she smiled softly. "But my future, it's with you. If you'll have me." His eyes softened, deepened. 1,000 emotions passed through them: surprise, uncertainty, fear, hope. At last he said, "I would have you, for as long as you choose to stay." Ella's heart soared. Flint spat into the dirt. "You're choosing him over me?" She nodded. "I am. You'll regret it." "Perhaps," she said gently, "but love is worth the risk." Flint snarled curses she'd never heard from him before. Her stomach twisted in sadness, but she didn't look away. Chilo untied Flint's legs so he could eventually stand, but he took Flint's horse, slapping its flank so it would return to town, proof Ella was alive. As Flint shouted after them, angry and heartbroken, Chilo lifted Ella into his arms and carried her to his small, sturdy pony. She wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm ready," she whispered. And together they rode into the forest, the fire's smoke drifting behind them like a farewell. Chapter 8. Into the Horizon. The forest changed as they traveled, trees growing taller, air cooler, the scent of pine giving way to fir and spruce. Chilo held her gently, careful of her ankle. Every now and then he glanced back at her, eyes asking if she needed rest. She never did. For the first time in days, her heart felt steady. "Chilo," she murmured as stars bloomed overhead. "Yes? Do you believe in destiny?" He considered. "I believe the forest brings together those who listen." Ella smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then I'm glad I listened." His hand covered hers. "You are brave," he said softly, "and kind. I do not know why the forest chose to send you to me, but I will honor it, and you." Tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming rightness of being beside him. As the moon rose higher, Chilo guided the pony across a stream toward a valley hidden deep within the mountains. A place untouched, peaceful, where he lived free of fear and hatred. Ella knew her life would be different now, harder in some ways, richer in others. She'd left behind the safety of Grayson Hollow for a future unknown, but she had chosen love, and as Chilo carried her toward the place he called home, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Together, hand in hand, they disappeared into the whispering woods, and the forest welcomed them.
Chapter 1. The Iron Cage. The stagecoach lurched violently, throwing Sarah Whitcomb against the wooden side with bruising force. She bit back a cry, clutching her worn carpetbag tighter against her chest as the two men across from her exchanged glances that made her skin crawl. "Pretty little thing, ain't she?" The one with the tobacco-stained beard leaned forward, his breath reeking of whiskey and decay. "Shame she's spoken for." Sarah pressed herself into the corner, her heart hammering against her ribs. The letter crinkled in her bodice, Sheriff Roger Dimple's proposal, written in surprisingly elegant script. A respectable position as my wife. Security, comfort, a home. Her parents had wept with relief when it arrived. One less mouth to feed in their crumbling Boston tenement. "Leave her be, Dutch," the driver had said at the last stop, but the driver was outside now, checking the horses. "Just want a little conversation," Dutch continued, his companion snickering. "Long journey to Covenant Creek. Might as well get acquainted." The other man, younger with cruel eyes, shifted closer. Maybe she could show some gratitude. We're escorting her safe, after all. Sarah's breath came in short gasps. She was barely 18, sheltered despite her poverty, and utterly alone. The endless Kansas plains stretched outside the window. Nothing but golden grass and merciless sky. "I'm engaged to the sheriff," she managed, her voice trembling. "He won't take kindly to—" "Dimple?" Dutch laughed, a harsh bark. "That snake don't care about nothing but his own hide. You think you're the first girl he's ordered up like dry goods?" The word struck her like a slap. Before she could respond, the stagecoach jolted to a stop. Voices outside. Dutch cursed and sat back, and both men straightened as the door swung open. "Restaurant stop," the driver called. 30 minutes. Stretch your legs. Get some victuals." Sarah didn't wait. She grabbed her bag and stumbled out into the blazing afternoon sun. her legs weak from days of travel. The way station was little more than a sagging structure with a hand-painted sign reading McGreevy's. A few horses stood tied to the rail, their tails flicking at flies. Inside, the dim interior offered little relief from the heat. The proprietor, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, gestured to a rough-hewn table. "Sit yourself, honey. Got stew and biscuits." Sarah's stomach growled despite her fear. She hadn't eaten since dawn. But as she sat, watching Dutch and his companion swagger in, laughter in their eyes, something inside her snapped. This was her future. Delivered like cargo to a man she'd never met, in a town where she knew no one. And if the sheriff was anything like these men suggested. The back door stood open, revealing a sliver of prairie. Sarah stood slowly, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. She moved toward the back as if seeking the privy, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The proprietor was busy serving Dutch. No one watched as Sarah slipped through the door and into the blinding sunlight. She ran. The grassland swallowed her, stretching endlessly in every direction. She ran until her lungs burned, until her fine eastern boots blistered her feet, until the way station disappeared behind the undulating waves of prairie. She had no plan, no destination, only the desperate need to escape the cage closing around her. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time became meaningless in the vast emptiness. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Sarah's lips cracked from thirst. Her legs trembled. She'd brought no water, no food, only the clothes on her back and the carpet bag that grew heavier with each step. As twilight deepened, Sarah stumbled. Her boot caught on something, a rock, a hole, and she fell hard, pain shooting through her ankle. She tried to rise but couldn't. The prairie spun around her, the sky tilting at impossible angles. "I'm going to die out here," she thought with strange clarity. Alone. The stars emerged, cold and distant. Sarah's eyes fluttered closed. Chapter 2. Strange Mercy. Warmth. Water trickling across cracked lips. The scent of sage and smoke. Sarah's eyes opened slowly, focusing on an impossible sight. A man's face above her, strong-featured and copper-skinned, with dark eyes that held unexpected gentleness. He wore his black hair long, adorned with feathers and beads, and geometric tattoos marked his bare shoulders. She tried to scream, but only a croak emerged. "Shh!" His voice was low, accented but clear. "You are safe." Sarah's heart raced with terror born of 1,000 whispered stories. Savages, massacres, captivity. She struggled weakly, but her body wouldn't obey. Exhaustion and dehydration had stolen her strength. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt me." Something flickered in his eyes. Sadness, perhaps, or resignation. He held a water skin to her lips again. "Drink. You will die without water." Survival instinct overwhelmed fear. Sarah drank greedily, the water like salvation sliding down her parched throat. When she'd had enough, the man set the skin aside and sat back on his heels, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "I am called Napeshni," he said. "It means strong in your language. You are far from any town. Why do you run alone in the desert?" Sarah's mind spun. She lay in what appeared to be a small camp, a hide shelter, a low fire, horses grazing nearby. The man who called himself Napeshni watched her with patience, making no move to harm her. I was traveling to Covenant Creek," she finally managed, "to marry a man I've never met. But the others in the coach, She couldn't finish, shame flooding through her. Napeshni nodded slowly, as if her incomplete explanation told him everything. "You chose the desert over the cage." Yes, Sarah whispered, startled by his understanding. That takes courage. He reached for a bundle of dried meat and offered it to her. Eat slowly. Your stomach has been empty too long. As Sarah nibbled the jerky, tough but surprisingly flavorful, she studied her rescuer covertly. He moved with fluid grace, tending the fire, checking her ankle with gentle hands that seemed incongruous with his warrior's build. His fingers probed the swollen joint, and she winced. Twisted, not broken, he said. You were fortunate. Fortunate? A hysterical laugh escaped her. I'm lost in the wilderness with no food or water, injured, and... She stopped, unable to voice the rest of her fear. Napeshni met her gaze steadily. And you believe I will harm you. Sarah couldn't deny it. He stood, moving to his horse, a magnificent paint stallion. From a leather satchel, he withdrew a long-bladed knife. Sarah's breath caught, but he merely used it to cut a length of rawhide. He returned and began fashioning a wrap for her ankle with sure practiced movements. I do not make war on lost girls, he said quietly. My people have known too much loss already. The white man's soldiers drive us from our hunting grounds. They kill our buffalo, burn our villages, break every promise their chiefs make. He secured the binding with surprising gentleness. But that does not mean I must become what they fear. Shame burned Sarah's cheeks. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You meant exactly what you said. You have heard stories. He sat back. Some are true, some are lies. But I am one man, not all men. He gestured to the darkening prairie. Tomorrow, when you're stronger, I will take you to Fort Larned. The soldiers there can help you return to your people. Relief and unexpected disappointment warred in Sarah's chest. Thank you, she whispered. That night, wrapped in a blanket Napeshni provided, Sarah lay awake listening to the prairie sounds. Wind through grass, distant coyote calls, the crackle of the fire. Napeshni sat sentinel on the far side of the flames, his presence somehow both foreign and comforting. She'd expected a monster, and found a man. Perhaps the most decent man she'd encountered since leaving Boston. Chapter 3. The Journey. Morning broke clear and cool. Sarah woke to find Napeshni already moving about camp, preparing something that smelled surprisingly good over the fire. Her ankle throbbed, but the binding had reduced the swelling. Can you ride? He asked, offering her a portion of roasted prairie hen and wild onions. Sarah had ridden exactly twice in her life, both times side saddle on a docile mare in Boston Common. I'm not sure. Napeshni nodded as if he'd expected this answer. You will ride with me. It is 3 days to Fort Larned. We must move quickly. There are dangers on the plains. Within an hour, camp was packed. Napeshni lifted Sarah onto his paint stallion with easy strength, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and Sarah stiffened at the sudden intimacy, his chest against her back, his warm breath stirring the loose tendrils of hair at her neck. Relax, he said softly. If you fight the horse's movement, the ride will be harder. They rode into the morning sun, the prairie unfolding endlessly before them. At first, Sarah remained rigid, hyper-aware of every place their bodies touched. But as the miles passed and the sun climbed higher, exhaustion won over propriety. She found herself leaning back against Napeshni's solid warmth, his arms a secure barrier keeping her from falling. He spoke occasionally, pointing out landmarks, a distant butte, the track of a deer, the pale green line that marked a creek. His voice rumbled through his chest into her back, oddly soothing. Sarah found herself asking questions, her fear gradually dissolving into curiosity. Where is your family? She ventured, as the sun reached its zenith. A long pause. Gone. Cholera took my mother and sister 3 winters ago. My father died fighting the bluecoats who came to move us from our lands." His tone remained even, but Sarah felt the tension in his body. "I have cousins in a band to the north, but I prefer to hunt alone now. Less chance of being found and forced onto a reservation." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, meaning it deeply. Her own losses, poverty, desperation, seemed smaller against such devastation. "We all carry grief," Napashni said. "What matters is what we do with it." They rode in comfortable silence after that, stopping at midday to water the horse and rest in the shade of a cottonwood grove. Napashni caught fish from the creek with his bare hands, a feat that left Sarah staring in amazement. He built a small fire and cooked them wrapped in wild greens, and Sarah discovered she'd never tasted anything more delicious. "You're very skilled," she said shyly as they ate. "You must think me terribly helpless." Napashni regarded her thoughtfully. "You survived alone on the plains for hours with no water or supplies. You chose freedom over security, even knowing the risk. That is not helpless. That is brave." He smiled slightly. "You simply have different skills than mine. I could not survive in your cities of stone and smoke." Something warm bloomed in Sarah's chest at his words. No one had ever called her brave. Foolish, desperate, a burden, but never brave. That afternoon as they rode, Napashni taught her Comanche words, the names for sky, grass, horse, water. Sarah practiced them, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds, delighted when she got them right. His rare smile became something she found herself working to earn. As evening approached, they made camp near a rocky outcropping that provided shelter from the wind. Napashni gathered wood while Sarah attempted to help, hobbling on her injured ankle. He stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Rest. Healing requires patience." "I feel useless," Sarah admitted. "Then tell me your story," Napashni said, coaxing the fire to life. "Why would a woman travel so far to marry a stranger?" Sarah settled against a sun-warmed rock and began to speak. The words came haltingly at first. Her family's poverty, her father's injury that left him unable to work, her mother's exhausting labor taking in washing, her 3 younger siblings with their hollow cheeks and patched clothes. The arrival of Sheriff Dimple's letter, like an answer to desperate prayers. "They wept when I left," Sarah said softly. "From relief as much as sorrow. I was their hope for a better future, and I failed them by running." "You did not fail," Napashni said firmly. "You cannot sacrifice yourself to please others, even family." He stoked the fire, sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. "This Sheriff Dimple, you know nothing of him?" "Only what he wrote, that he's respected in Covenant Creek, that he wants a wife to make a home." Sarah's voice dropped, but the men in the stagecoach said things that made me doubt. "Trust your instincts. They guided you to run." Sarah met his eyes across the fire. "They guided me to you." Something shifted in the air between them. Napashni held her gaze, and Sarah saw the same awareness in his expression that she felt stirring in her own heart. It was impossible, forbidden, dangerous, and yet undeniable. "You should sleep," Napashni said finally, his voice rougher than before. "We have another hard day tomorrow." But as Sarah lay wrapped in blankets beneath stars more numerous than she'd ever imagined, she found herself watching Napashni's silhouette against the firelight and wondering what other impossibilities might be waiting in this vast, untamed land. Chapter 4. Truth and Consequence. The 3rd day dawned with distant thunder rumbling across the horizon. Napashni studied the darkening clouds with a frown as they broke camp. "Storm coming. We should reach Fort Larned by afternoon if we push hard." He paused. Unless what? Sarah prompted. He turned to face her, his expression uncertain, the first time she'd seen him anything less than confident. There is a trading post closer, run by a French trapper named Baptiste. He knows me, trades fairly with my people. You would be safe there until the storm passes. Then I could take you to the fort. Sarah's pulse quickened. Another day before they parted. Would that be acceptable? Relief flickered across Napishni's features. Yes. They rode hard as the storm built, racing against the advancing wall of black clouds. Napishni's arms tightened around Sarah as the wind picked up, pressing her more firmly against him. She no longer flinched from the contact. Instead, she found herself treasuring each brush of his breath against her neck, each moment of their closeness. When had fear transformed into something else? When had this stranger become someone she trusted more than anyone in her past life? The trading post appeared like salvation as the first fat raindrops began to fall. A sturdy log structure with smoke rising from the chimney and several horses in the corral. Napishni urged his stallion forward, and they reached shelter just as the heavens opened. The door swung wide, revealing a bear of a man with a wild gray beard and welcoming eyes. Napishni, mon ami, come in from this devil's weather. Inside, the trading post was a chaotic marvel. Furs and blankets stacked to the rafters, shelves lined with goods, a pot-bellied stove radiating blessed warmth. Baptiste ushered them to the fire, pressing tin cups of coffee into their hands, while rapid-fire questions poured from him in accented English, mixed with French. Napishni explained Sarah's situation, though he edited the story, making no mention of the men in the stagecoach who'd frightened her. Sarah watched him, grateful for his discretion, and caught Baptiste's knowing look as the old trapper studied them both. Ah, Baptiste said finally, a smile hiding in his beard. Well, you are welcome here, mademoiselle. The storm she will blow through by tomorrow. Then you can continue to... He glanced at Napishni. Where was she going? Covenant Creek, to marry Sheriff Dimple, Napishni said, his tone carefully neutral. Baptiste's expression changed dramatically. Roger Dimple? Non, you must be mistaken. Sarah's stomach dropped. Do you know him? Know of him. Baptiste set down his cup heavily. Mademoiselle, I do not wish to speak ill, but this man is not what he seems. There are rumors. The door burst open and 3 men stumbled in from the storm, water streaming from their hats and dusters. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She recognized 2 of them, Dutch and his companion from the stagecoach. The third wore a silver star on his vest. Well, Roger Dimple said, his cold eyes finding Sarah instantly. My runaway bride. Chapter 5. Revelations. Sheriff Dimple was handsome in a sharp, predatory way. Blonde hair slicked back, a thin mustache, eyes like chips of blue ice. He moved into the trading post with the confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Miss Whitcomb, you've caused quite a stir. His smile didn't reach his eyes. These gentlemen were kind enough to alert me when you vanished. I've been searching for days. Sarah stood frozen. Napishni, a silent presence at her shoulder. Dutch and his companion flanked Dimple. Their earlier menace now explained. They were his men. I got lost, Sarah managed. Mr. Napishni found me and was escorting me to Fort Larned. I'm sure he was. Dimple's gaze raked over Napishni with open contempt. Very noble of you, savage. I'll take her from here. The lady was going to the fort, Baptiste interjected, his voice hard. Perhaps that is still best, eh? Until proper arrangements... Proper arrangements, Dimple laughed. I have a legal contract with Miss Whitcomb's parents. She agreed to become my wife. That makes her my responsibility. He extended his hand to Sarah. Come along, dear. We have a wedding to plan. Every instinct screamed at Sarah to refuse. But what choice did she have? She signed her name to that contract. Her family depended on the money Dimple had sent them. And he was the law here, a sheriff, sworn to protect and serve. Even if nothing about him felt safe. Napishni stepped forward, subtly positioning himself between Sarah and the three men. Perhaps Miss Whitcomb should rest tonight. The journey has been difficult. Tomorrow is none of your concern, Injun. Dutch's hand moved to his gun. The sheriff said he's taking her. You got a problem with that? The tension in the room became suffocating. Baptiste's eyes darted between the groups, his hand edging toward a rifle behind the counter. Sarah's heart hammered as she saw Napishni's muscles coil, ready for violence. Stop, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Please, no one needs to be hurt. She forced herself to meet Dimple's cold gaze. I'll come with you, Sheriff, but I'm exhausted. Could we wait until morning, as Mr. Napishni suggested? Dimple studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. Fair enough. Baptiste, you have rooms? Oui, 2 rooms, one for the lady, one for you men. Perfect. Dimple settled into a chair by the fire, his posture relaxed but his eyes never leaving Sarah. We'll leave at first light. Miss Whitcomb and I have much to discuss about our future together. The evening was torture. Sarah picked at the meal Baptiste prepared, hyper-aware of Dimple watching her every move. Napishni sat silent and tense, his presence the only thing keeping her from falling apart. When Baptiste finally showed her to a small back room, she felt both relief and desperate fear. Napishni followed her into the corridor. Sarah, he said softly, the first time he'd used her given name. Something is wrong with this man. I can feel it. I know, Sarah whispered, but what can I do? I signed a contract. My family. Your life matters more than a contract. His hand found hers in the shadows, warm and solid. If you want to run again, I will help you. We can leave tonight while they sleep. Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. And go where? Live how? You said yourself your people are being hunted, forced onto reservations. I can't ask you to risk more because of me. You are not asking. I am offering. Napishni's thumb traced across her knuckles, the simple touch sending warmth through her entire body. These 3 days, you have become important to me. You've become important to me too, Sarah admitted, tears pricking her eyes. More than I can say, but Napishni, even if we ran, we could never... She couldn't finish. The gulf between their worlds was too vast. I know. His voice was heavy with understanding and shared grief. Sleep, Sarah Whitcomb. I will watch over you tonight. But sleep wouldn't come. Sarah lay in the narrow bed, listening to the storm raging outside and the murmur of male voices from the main room. She heard Dimple laugh, a cold, humorless sound, and Dutch's coarse response. Then other words, clearer. The Kansas City job was clean. Got away with 12,000. Keep your damn voice down, you fool. Baptiste's got big ears. Sheriff, when we going to... After the wedding. Need the appearance of respectability for a few more months. Then we move on to Denver. Sarah's breath froze. Sheriff Dimple. Planning a robbery. Not preventing one. Planning it. The men from the stagecoach had tried to warn her in their crude way. This was no lawman. Roger Dimple was an outlaw wearing a badge. And tomorrow, She was supposed to marry him. A soft tap at her door made her jump. Baptiste's voice, barely a whisper. "Mademoiselle, I need to speak with you, quietly." Sarah crept to the door and opened it a crack. The old trapper's face was grave in the candlelight. "I heard them talking," he whispered. "Dimple is not a real lawman. He and his men robbed a bank in Kansas City last month. They are wanted men." He pressed something into her hand, a small derringer. "If you need to protect yourself, mademoiselle." "Does Napishni know?" Sarah asked urgently. "I will tell him, but you must decide what you want to do. If you wish to escape, we will help. But it must be now, before they wake." Sarah's mind raced. Her family, the contract, the money already spent. But none of that mattered if Dimple was a criminal. If he planned to use their marriage as a cover for his crimes, or worse, as a way to control her, trap her, perhaps eventually silence her if she learned too much. "Tell Napishni I'll go with him," she said. Tell him I choose freedom." Chapter 6. Deliverance. They fled into the storm. Napishni had his paint stallion saddled and ready in Baptiste's barn. Supplies quickly gathered. The old trapper would claim he slept through their departure, bought them precious hours before Dimple realized his bride had vanished again. "He'll come after us," Sarah said as Napishni lifted her onto the horse. "He can't let me go. I know what he is now." "Let him try." Napishni swung up behind her, his arms coming around her in the now familiar embrace. "I know places in these plains where no white man can follow." They rode into the teeth of the storm, lightning illuminating the prairie in stark flashes. Rain lashed them, and the wind tried to tear them from the saddle, but Napishni guided his horse with unwavering skill. Sarah clung to the animal's mane, pressed tight against Napishni's chest, his heartbeat steady against her back. Hours passed in a blur of darkness and thunder. Finally, as dawn struggled through the breaking clouds, they reached a canyon Sarah hadn't seen before, a hidden cleft in the earth with steep rock walls and a sheltered cave entrance. "My people used this place for generations," Napishni explained as he helped Sarah down. "Few white men know it exists." Inside, the cave was surprisingly large and dry. Someone, perhaps Napishni himself, had left supplies here: blankets, firewood, dried food. He quickly built a fire while Sarah collapsed against the wall, exhausted and shivering. "Here." Napishni draped a blanket around her shoulders and offered her water. "You're safe now." "For how long?" Sarah asked, but without heat. She was too tired for despair. "Dimple won't stop looking, and I can't hide forever." "No," Napishni agreed, "but we have time to plan. Baptiste will get word to the army about Dimple and his men. Without the badge, Dimple is just another outlaw. He will have to run." "And what about us?" The words escaped before Sarah could stop them. "I've ruined my family's hope. I'm a fugitive from a legal contract. I have nothing. I am nothing." "You are everything." Napishni turned to her, his dark eyes fierce. "You are brave and strong. You chose honor over security. You chose freedom over a cage," while he cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "And you are not nothing to me." Sarah's breath caught. "Napishni." "I know the world will not accept us," he continued softly. "My people will say you are the enemy. Your people will say I am a savage. But Sarah, in these few days you have shown me that hate is not the only path. That understanding is possible." His thumb traced her cheek. "I do not know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." Tears spilled down Sarah's face. not from fear or desperation, but from something she'd never expected to feel, hope, and something deeper, warmer, more precious. "I want that too," she whispered. "I don't care what anyone says. I choose you. I choose this." When Napashni kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious. Sarah melted into his embrace, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, his hair. The kiss deepened, became something fierce and passionate, 3 days of growing connection igniting into undeniable truth. They made love there in the firelight, the storm forgotten outside. Napashni touched her with the same gentleness he'd shown her injured ankle, the same care he'd taken teaching her to ride. Sarah gave herself to him completely. Every fear and doubt burned away in the heat of their joining. Afterward, wrapped in blankets in each other's arms, they talked in whispers about possibilities. Napashni knew of a mixed settlement far to the north, a place where people of different backgrounds lived together, building something new. His cousin had married a French woman there. They could go there, start over, build a life that belonged to no one's rules but their own. "It won't be easy," Napashni warned. "We will face hatred, suspicion, danger." "I don't care," Sarah said firmly. "These past 3 days with you have been more real, more true than anything in my old life. I was dead in Boston, Napashni. I was a ghost going through motions. You brought me back to life." He kissed her forehead. "Then we will live together." 3 days later, a military patrol arrived at Covenant Creek in Kansas, armed with information from a French trapper named Baptiste. No, they found Sheriff Roger Dimple's office empty, the badge abandoned on the desk. Dimple and his men had vanished. Wanted posters now distributed across 3 territories for bank robbery, fraud, and a dozen other crimes. The people of Covenant Creek mourned their lost sheriff until they discovered the truth about the man who'd fooled them all. Then they simply felt grateful that a young woman from Boston had had the courage to run before it was too late. Epilogue: New Territory. Sarah stood outside the small cabin, watching autumn paint the northern hills in shades of gold and crimson. 6 months had passed since that storm-tossed flight from Baptiste's trading post. 6 months of building a life from nothing but determination and love. The settlement Napashni had promised was real. A collection of cabins and farms where Comanche, Cheyenne, French, Mexican, and yes, even a few white Americans lived together in wary cooperation. It wasn't paradise. There were still conflicts, still prejudice, still people who believed mixing the races was unnatural or wrong. But there was also community. There were neighbors who'd helped them build their cabin, who'd welcomed Sarah despite her pale skin, who'd taught her to tan hides and forage for prairie turnips. There were children of mixed heritage playing together, learning multiple languages, creating something entirely new. And there was Napashni, her husband in every way that mattered, even if no church or courthouse would recognize their bond. Arms circled her waist from behind, and Sarah smiled as Napashni's chin came to rest on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. "That I'm home," Sarah said simply. "That I finally understand what that word means." "Did you finish the letter to your parents?" Sarah nodded. She'd struggled for weeks with what to say to her family, how to explain her choices, her new life. Finally, she'd settled on simple truth. She'd sent money, earned from her sewing, from Napashni's trapping, and a letter explaining that she was safe, happy, and had found a good man who loved her. She did not mention that her husband was Comanche. Some truths required more courage than she yet possessed. Perhaps someday, or perhaps they would never understand. Either way, Sarah had learned that she could not live her life for others' approval. A rider came today, Napashni said, his tone changing. Brought news. Roger Dimple and his gang tried to rob a bank in Denver. The job went wrong. Dimple was killed in the crossfire. Sarah absorbed this, waiting for some feeling. Fear, relief, guilt, but found only a distant sadness for a life wasted on greed and violence. Good, she said finally. He can't hurt anyone else now. You are free of him. Completely. I've been free since the moment I ran, Sarah said, turning in Napashni's arms to face him. I was just too frightened to realize it. She rose on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the simple touch. You taught me that freedom isn't about escaping cages. It's about choosing who you want to be. And who do you choose to be, Sarah Whitcomb? She smiled. Yours, for as long as you'll have me. Forever, then, Napashni said, and kissed her as the sun set over their new territory. A land of possibility where two lost souls had found each other and, against all odds, had built something worth keeping. Love, after all, knew no boundaries. Not of culture, not of race, not of the world's expectations. It simply was, fierce and tender, impossible and inevitable, like the prairie itself. And that was enough.